Hello there. Welcome to Blitz Transmissions. I'm Tommy, and this is episode 24 of the Blitzcast. Before we get into the content of this podcast episode, make sure, as always, to subscribe if you're not yet subscribed to Blitz Transmissions. I've got awesome Star Wars content coming out all the time. If you are an ARC trooper in my Patreon, you would have seen this podcast early. If you'd like access to early content, monthly giveaways, and more awesome benefits, make sure to check out the link in the description below for my Patreon, as well as if you're more into the action figure side of things and more into the reviews and such, there is a link to my Rancor Battalion channel membership that gives you access to all of my reviews early as well. In addition to that, make sure to check out all the links in the social media for Instagram, my Blitz Bounties Instagram page, my X page, and my Discord as well. All those links are in there. You can check them out, and I highly encourage you to. Here we are. It is another week. I'm by myself again. I know. This is the reality of, there's going to be months where, like I said, I think last week I said this, I have an opposite work schedule to Jen this month, so it's just difficult for us to find time during the week to record a podcast when we barely see each other as it is. So you're going to get a lot of me, just Tommy, this month. I know you're probably sick of me yapping because that's all I do on this channel, but yeah, so this is really just another week of, light Star Wars news. There's not a whole lot to discuss. As far as the Disney parks go, there is like one little thing. I know I think it's called Seasons of the Force is what they're doing right now. Luke Skywalker is going to be at Galaxy's Edge. So that's pretty cool, as well as R2-D2, it looks like. So that's neat. I still have never been to Galaxy's Edge. I would love to one day maybe travel to either Florida or California and attend that park. I'm sure I would love every moment of it. But yeah, I just haven't been. It hasn't been in the cards for me. I've a trip to Florida or California really hasn't been something that's been on the table for me lately. Lots of other stuff going on. Lots of other stuff I'm focused on right now. Like paying for a wedding and such. So that's just the reality of it. As of this last week, I have a couple reviews that came out on the channel, as well as my Toy Hio vlog. If you want to hear the trials and tribulations of my van exploding almost on the way to Toy Hio, you can watch the vlog. Right now, my van's in the shop. My Millennium Falcon is in the shop right now. My mechanic's taking a look at it. I dropped it off a couple days ago. Haven't heard from him. My thought is that the coolant got really, really low because I don't use my vehicle unless really I'm driving to work. It's very, very rare that I would ever drive it more than like 5 or maybe 10 minutes at a time. And so I think the coolant just got really low, and because of that, there were some air bubbles that built up in the coolant system in the engine. And really, it's not to my understanding, it's not a terribly expensive fix for them to pretty much just flush out the system and put more coolant into the system. But yeah, it just is what it is. So. Yeah, so here we are, another week in Star Wars, as I completely, disregard all the other topics I was talking about. There's not a whole lot going on other than the Galaxy's Edge stuff, and again, I can't really talk about much when it comes to that because I'm just not well-versed in the Disney park stuff, The only real things I have from the Disney parks right now are a pair of binders and the Gunji Legacy Saber. That's all that I own from the parks. Aside from that, it's something that is strange to me, and I would love to attend one day. I'm sure I will. So this week, I was kind of just thinking of a topic, and I kind of wanted to talk about something that I think is important to discuss. As a Star Wars fan, not just, I'm more of a Star Wars fan of, I enjoy everything Star Wars. I can find enjoyment in every Star Wars movie, show, book, you name it. Even if I don't like most of it, there's some level of enjoyment that I can find in at least one part of everything. So I kind of wanted to talk about Andor, because Andor is a pretty hot button topic among the Star Wars fandom, and it's it's actually really funny because I feel like Andor has become like the champion of like the anti-woke, like I hate Disney Star Wars portion of people who make Star Wars content, because Andor is a very, very well written show. It's very atmospheric. The acting is fantastic. The tone, the pacing. Andor is really, really good, and it's definitely what you would call like a slow burn. You know, a lot of things happen throughout the show, but everything kind of leads up to that final moment in that finale episode. I absolutely love Andor. So before I get into all this, don't get it twisted. I love Andor, and I figured this was also a good topic to bring up because Andor is like, 2 months away now, I think? I know Andor's coming out in April. So, yeah, about 2 months from now, Andor's going to be coming out, and I figured it would be a relevant topic to bring up on the Blitzcast this week. But yeah, I wanted to make a disclaimer at the beginning of this that I do enjoy Andor thoroughly. I have all of the Black Series action figures from Andor that have been released. I own, all those figures. I've watched the show multiple times. I really, really enjoy it. There's just a lot of conversation that comes with Andor that I don't think I agree with. And I kind of wanted to just spitball my thoughts on the Blitzcast this week in regards to that. So I think the first point I want to make is, with Andor being a phenomenal show, is Andor what Star Wars should be going forward? Should Andor be the model as to what Star Wars should be? And I'm going to say short answer is no, and I'll explain why. Andor is great as a kind of one-off, trying something new Star Wars project, and I've been really enjoying the show. I'm excited for season 2 as well. The thing with Andor is a show that is written in a more mature way, and it's geared for an adult audience. Andor is definitely not for, I shouldn't say it's not for 12-year-olds, but Andor is not like most of your other Star Wars where its intended audience, its target audience is children, elementary schoolers, middle schoolers. And I think that there's a lot of conversation that's had about Star Wars, because you have one camp that says, oh, well, George Lucas said Star Wars made for 12-year-olds, so that means we should never take it seriously, and there's, it's stupid and lighthearted, and then there's the other side that gets mad at that and says, well, George was wrong, like, there's so much to enjoy with Star Wars, like, as an adult, blah, blah, blah. I think at its heart, at its core, Star Wars is a family experience. Star Wars is a family watch. Star Wars originated as a family soap opera. And then we get that with the original trilogy, the soap opera of the Skywalker family. That's what it is. It's what it always was. I think with this franchise, we have to both temper our expectations and our beliefs of what the franchise is, as well as not underestimate the franchise. When I say this, I mean that Star Wars as a franchise has always been primarily targeted towards children. And but when I say that, that doesn't mean that Star Wars is not intelligent, or that it's, only for kids, or that it's supposed to be digested, at a 12-year-old's level. No, there are plenty of complex issues, themes, things that adults can enjoy that might go over a kid's head when they watch Star Wars. And I think that's something unique about Star Wars, is that as you grow up, you can learn more from the franchise and you can appreciate different things. I think that's something that we lose sight of, because I think a lot of times, specifically with the Star Wars fandom, when we hear something we don't want to hear, we don't agree with, we can tend to like spin it into being making statements into more than what they are. I think when George said that Star Wars is for 12-year-olds, I think he really means what he said there. Star Wars is a hero's journey. It's a fun story for kids, but that doesn't mean that adults can't enjoy it. And George definitely did not mean that adults can't enjoy it. I think what George meant with that statement was that adults tend to be way too critical of the franchise, because at the end of the day, it is just a fun story for kids. It's supposed to be a fun family watch, a fun family experience. And I think, honestly, I talked about this, a week or two ago on the Blitzcast. I think the fandom as a whole expects too much from Star Wars sometimes. I think that my good friend Skywalker Hendricks, go check out his channel. He has said time and time again that Star Wars has become something more than what it was ever intended to be. I don't think that, with Star Wars being one of the biggest franchises of all time, I think that there's expectations for it that are unrealistic. And Andor is a perfect example of that. Andor is a fantastic story. It's an extremely strong narrative, and through, I think it's a fantastic watch. The difference is that Andor doesn't have a lot of lighthearted, fun moments that really bring in what I would call that family aspect. Andor stays pretty dark through and through. It stays very serious through and through. And that's the tone that Andor's trying to portray. Andor was not targeted for a younger audience. I guess I just tend to disagree with when I hear people say that Andor should be the model that Star Wars follows going forward, because Star Wars is not for primarily an older audience. It is for kids, and that's what's kept Star Wars alive. A huge part of why it's still so big to this day is because it's been able to be passed down from generation to generation. There are kids that can watch the original trilogy, kids can watch the original trilogy, the prequel trilogy, the sequel trilogy, all the series, animated, live action. And there's something in a lot of these stories that are for, okay, well, when my kids watch this, then they're going to grow up and become Star Wars fans because they also became so attached to these characters the same way that I did when I was a kid. I think that that's the one thing for me that's lacking with Andor when I hear people talk about it versus other shows. When I hear people talk about The Mandalorian or Ahsoka or what's another good one to bring up here? Even the Book of Boba Fett, the Clone Wars, the Bad Batch, all these shows. I hear people say, yeah, and my kids loved watching it too. My kids really enjoyed this character. My kids love Mando and Baby Yoda. My kids love Boba Fett. It's this recurring statement of there's these characters are appealing to kids and they're enjoyable for kids to watch, and that's going to plant the seed for the next generation of Star Wars fans. I think with Andor, you don't have that, and that's not anything against the show or the writing. I think it's what I disagree with is when people say Andor should be the model going forward, because I have never heard someone say, and this is, obviously anecdotal, but I've never heard someone say, my kids love watching Andor. My kids can't get enough of that Andor show, because it's not for kids. A kid can watch Andor. That's, again, I don't want to get it twisted. I don't want to say that, I don't want it to seem like I'm, dumping on Andor over here, because I'm not. But I think that it's dangerous, such a stupid word when I'm talking about a fictional franchise. I think we should be wary as a fandom of how we talk about Andor, because I don't think that Star Wars will survive in the generational way that it has for almost 50 years now if we make the majority of content like Andor, if we make it very dark, very serious for an adult audience, because then you don't have a next generation that grows up with Star Wars. I think that's the kind of the first point I wanted to make here, was when you're looking at a show that's so very, very tonally different than the rest of the franchise, I think that it's important to point out that, this is it. There's a reason that all the other stuff has a different tone, and that's because the intention is to rope the next generation in and keep the franchise and the fandom alive. And that's not to say, because I know that the rebuttal to that is, well, in Star Wars, people get their heads chopped off and their hands chopped off and their legs cut and they get blasted in the face and blah blah. Yes, but those things happen and the general tone and the general entertainment is for a younger audience still. And that's kind of to my first point. I think it's a great way to segue here is Star Wars has always had dark elements to it. It's from the very beginning. Luke Skywalker witnesses the burnt to a crisp corpses of his aunt and uncle, the only parent figures he's ever known at that point in his life. Again, burnt to a crisp by stormtroopers. And that happens in the first hour of the film. And you can have things like that and then also have a fun adventure for kids. I think that is what Star Wars is at its heart. I think that what I love about Star Wars is that there's something in it for everyone. That's why I love Skeleton Crew is a great example of this. I know a lot of people like to say it's just a kid's show. It's okay. It's blah, blah, blah. Because it doesn't have those super dark themes that people are looking for. I also don't understand this obsession with like, I want to see like I want to see how dark it can get in every single project. Like, whatever, man. Like, learn to have some enjoyment, some lighthearted fare. I think with this franchise, it's very consistently showing that 12-year-olds, again, I'll keep using that demographic because that's what George Lucas, in the famous quote that everyone loves to bring up, says, Star Wars is made for 12-year-olds. 12-year-olds can understand. Their brains are developed enough to understand, themes and motifs and music, and this is where their brains are starting to be developed enough to understand nuance and things like that. And Star Wars is a great tool to build on those skills. Star Wars it shows you through and through that the world is not all sunshine and rainbows, and it explains it to you in different ways, and it explains it to kids in a way that I think is helpful to them. It's still an entertaining adventure, but we don't not every story needs to be all the good guys die and a Sith Lord comes out and decapitates everyone. That stuff's badass. I love to see it. But I don't think that defines mature Star Wars, or I don't think it defines, what Star Wars should be going forward. I personally think that The Mandalorian is an example of great family Star Wars. I think The Mandalorian is the most current example of what Star Wars is. It's a show that clearly is targeted at, it's a family watch. There's a lot to enjoy as an adult, but it's clearly targeted towards kids because you have a cool character in a mask that has a cool father-son relationship with an unsuspecting ally. It's a great show that has lots of fun characters, lots of comedic relief, lots of lighter moments that aren't so in your face, and it at its heart is Star Wars. That's what I think it really hits what Star Wars is at its core. And I just don't want to see the adult fandom lose that, because that's the other thing. The only people that I see really, weaponizing Andor, I guess, are obviously of grifters on the internet and stuff that say like, Andor is the only good Star Wars Disney has ever made. Obviously, I disagree, but everyone's entitled to their own opinion. My issue is, when we're watching a show like Andor, I think we just have to be mindful of the target audience of Star Wars as a whole, not just the target audience of Andor, because obviously adults prefer Andor because that show was targeted at adults. And when you take a show and compare it to something else that isn't even the same tonally or in any other way, I feel like it's an unfair comparison. Like, for example, a great comparison, great analogy here. Comparing Andor to, like, the Book of Boba Fett or The Mandalorian is like comparing Hot Toys to a 6-inch or a 3 3/4 inch action figure of the same character. Obviously, you could look at one and say, well, I as an adult think that this big, highly detailed, super expensive one is highly superior to, this smaller, stupid little one because it doesn't look as good. But a kid is going to probably tell you otherwise. A kid is going to pick the little action figure over the giant posable statue that they can't do as much with. They can't put it in their book bag. They can't put it in their pocket and carry it around to the mall or to grandma's house or whatever. And I think that Star Wars is the same way, where you have stuff for adults that we can marvel at and enjoy and really look at the intricacies of it. A little bit more rich in taste, a little bit more expensive in taste, mind you. And then there's the rest of Star Wars, which, if you look behind me here, I love my Hot Toys. I love them, but Hot Toys are few and far between. Action figures I'll buy hundreds of, over the course of years. And I think that that's telling to the analogy of Star Wars. You can never go wrong with a good action figure, is my point. And yes, it might be cheaper, it might not be as intricate or detailed, or have as many cool little features as the bigger, cooler Hot Toy does. But I think that at its root, these action figures are what have always kept Star Wars alive as far as the merchandising aspect goes. And I think it's the same for Star Wars as a whole. Stuff like The Mandalorian is what's going to give the franchise longevity. Versus, Andor is a great show. But I don't think that it's the thing that's going to, as some people say, save Star Wars. And, because if you look at when both shows first came out, again, as I'm sitting here saying you can't compare them, I guess I'll prove my point here. When The Mandalorian came out, The Mandalorian broke the world. like the entire world of pop culture went into spirals over Baby Yoda. What? We've never seen a baby version of Yoda's species. What the hell's going on? This is amazing. What is this? Oh, this is so fun. It's like a spaghetti western week to week. And it completely blew up the internet. And you see Baby Yoda merch for kids everywhere. Mando and Grogu are extremely marketable characters. You have a cool character in a mask that's a bounty hunter. He's got all the cool gadgets and gizmos, and then you have his cute little companion that does silly little fun things all the time and makes the family laugh. Versus Andor, you don't see a lot of Andor merch almost at all for kids, because Andor is a show for a more mature adult audience. And when Andor was coming out, I remember a lot of people slept on Andor. A lot of people weren't even bothering to watch the show until it was out. And it wasn't until after the entire show was out that you started to kind of, over time, see this championing of Andor as the best Star Wars show, the highest quality Star Wars show that Disney's released. And I just don't see it. I just don't see how that comparison can be made, because the shows are targeting two different audiences. It's two different it's two different subgenres of the same exact franchise. And I think that is a huge point that needs made as well. I feel like Andor as a whole is a show that is extremely fun to watch as an adult. But again, I should have if I would have had the time in my week this week, I'd have had Cheesy Napkin on, released him from the dungeon again. My brother Logan, he didn't watch Andor until I want to say a month or two ago. He didn't even watch it because he was like, it's boring, I can't get into it. And he is the target demographic for The Mandalorian and other stuff. He's at that prime age right now that those other shows are trying to target. And he will watch The Mandalorian again and again. He'll watch Book of Boba, Obi-Wan Kenobi. He'll watch all those shows time and time again. But he didn't watch Andor until just recently. And he told me he doesn't plan on watching it again. He said he does enjoy it because, again, I think there's stuff to enjoy for his demographic from Andor. But he said it's just not his cup of tea. Maybe in 5 or 6 years when he's approaching his 20s, he'll be like, oh yeah, I really like Andor. This show's really great. I love the nuance and all the themes and blah, blah, blah. And the tone. But that's just not, those aren't the things that 14-year-olds are looking at, as much, as deeply as us adults are. So that's kind of my biggest point with Andor is, we're going into season 2. I'm super excited. I friggin' love the show. I'm really excited to have something to talk about week to week on the Blitzcast again. And I can't wait to discuss the show with you guys and kind of really get into the nitty gritty, because Tony Gilroy does a great job at writing this show. I just think that Andor is a show that is being used as a kind of scapegoat for, what people think Disney Star Wars should be. Now, that being said, I think that the level of care and thought that went into the writing, the pacing, the tone of Andor should be translated to other Star Wars projects. That is where I agree, because I will also make the point that Andor is definitely the most cohesive feeling show out of all of the shows that Disney Plus has published for new content in the last few years here. That I feel like is a very important point to make, because Andor feels like a chapter book. It doesn't feel like story of the week. It feels like you're reading a novel from front to back, and you're really enjoying every chapter. And that by the time every chapter's over, you can't wait for the next one. I think that, unfortunately, a lot of the Mandoverse stuff suffered from a lot of politics from suits and shareholders and executives, and that really hurt the narrative because it forced the creatives into a corner. They had to rearrange things last minute. They had this whole story planned out, how they were going to tell it, and now they're kind of like backed into a corner, and they're like, well, now I have to change things around, omit characters because actors got fired, and it just was very, very sad that Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni had to pivot. You can see where the pivot point was too. You had The Mandalorian season 1, you had The Mandalorian season 2, and then all of a sudden from like Book of Boba Fett all the way to like end of Mando season 3, it was like we scrambled the chips and we had to just kind of put things wherever we thought they fit, because pieces of the puzzle were now missing. And I don't want to get too into that, because at the end of the day, all this is speculation to me. This whole thing here, and I think that's what saved Andor in a lot of ways, because Andor was completely independent from all the Mandoverse stuff, and I think that because of that show was able to really flourish and be its own thing. I kind of think it's very important for us to recognize that there's a lot of reasons that Andor is so different from the rest of the media that was coming out around the same time. You know what? Forget it. I'll just share my speculation, and you guys let me know what you think, because I think I'm right on the money here. I think that the whole thing, so we had Mando Season 1 and Mando Season 2. Very clearly in Mando Season 2, they set up that Cara Dune was going to join up with Carson Teva and join back up with the New Republic. And that she was going to be the main character of Rangers of the New Republic, the canceled show. What happened, back in like 2020, Gina Carano, the actress that plays Cara Dune, gets fired by Kathleen Kennedy. Rather than recast the character or put a new character in her shoes, to fill the role of the main character of Rangers of the New Republic, which in my opinion would have just been a limited one-season series, kind of like Book of Boba Fett. I think they fired her and then turned around and told whoever it was, whether it was Kathleen Kennedy or the suits or whoever it was, some middle manager came down and told Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni, hey, Gina's fired. We're canceling Rangers in the New Republic. Figure it out. And so now you have Jon and Dave, who were writing out this entire, Mandoverse. And now they've stopped at Mando Season 2, and now they have to shuffle. And you already have Book of Boba Fett, which has already, been teased in an end credit scene in Mando Season 2. That's already actively in the works, and now you have to move stuff around. So I think that, if you look at the Book of Boba Fett, that show is 7 episodes, which I always thought was weird, because other than that show, every other live-action Disney Plus Star Wars series has always been an even number of episodes. It's either been 6 episodes like Obi-Wan Kenobi for a limited series, or 8 episodes like Mando, Ahsoka, or 12 episodes like Andor. But again, even numbers, very nice little chunks. And one of those episodes of Book of Boba Fett is basically just we call it Mando Season 2.5, where we have to hurry up and get Mando back with Grogu, because I think that was going to be a big plot point of Mando season 3, was going to be that Mando and Grogu are separated for, if not the whole show, a good chunk of the show, so that they can kind of, do their own thing. Kind of Grogu can learn more about the Force with Luke, and Mando can kind of do his own thing with the Mandalorians. I think that they had to rewrite some stuff and really kind of shoehorn Din Djarin and Grogu into the Book of Boba Fett, and I think the Book of Boba Fett suffered as a whole because they had to hurry up and shoehorn Mando and Grogu in, because ultimately the Book of Boba Fett's a spin-off show of The Mandalorian, and you're really trying to, further the narrative of The Mandalorian and Grogu. So I think that show suffered. And then in Mando season 3, it was just a domino effect, because I think that what they were trying to tell in Mando season 3 had to get cut, because they had to now shoehorn an entire episode in to show Dr. Pershing, and I forget her name. She's the Imperial officer that's secondhand to Moff Gideon in season 2, kind of the Amnesty Project, everything going on Coruscant with the New Republic. I think that show was what Rangers of the New Republic was supposed to be, and they had to condense the whole thing into one single episode of Mando season 3, and now they're like, well, where are we going to put this extra story, this extra chapter from Mando season 3? Well, let's just put it in Book of Boba Fett so we can move things along. And because of that, I think that the entire narrative suffered. To a lot of people, it probably came across as sloppy. To me, I still really enjoyed all of it, but you can definitely tell that it's like, at certain points, things just feel super rushed, where it almost feels inconsistent with the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian in that way. And that's why I was happy that we had Ahsoka, because I felt like Ahsoka season 1 was really like us getting back on track with the real story that they're trying to tell here, and serving to bring our new big bad. Now that Moff Gideon is gone, allegedly, we have our new big bad being Grand Admiral Thrawn back in the Star Wars galaxy. And I think that it's very, very unfortunate, and that's something I preach all the time on the channel. I wish that the corporations would just leave the shareholders out of it, which I know that's impossible. It's a publicly traded company, blah blah blah. I think that I don't think that. I wish that they would just let the creatives do their thing. And I don't understand why the solution had to be cancel Rangers of the New Republic altogether. Why couldn't the solution have been making some sort of deal where we could do Harrison Dula as the main character, or we could do Carson Teva as the main character, or there's plenty of other characters. You could have introduced a new character to replace her, or you could have recast her. There are plenty of things that they could have done to fix that, and I feel like they just instead threw a temper tantrum, for lack of better phrasing, and kind of threw everything in the dumpster, and then looked at the writers, Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau, and said, figure it out. And here, you have a deadline. That's within like months. Within a year, you have to rewrite and figure out everything. And again, I think the whole thing suffered. And it's one of the many, many, many blunders of the Disney Star Wars era. It's just stupid people who know nothing about being a creative, writing, directing, acting, nothing, trying to make decisions for people who are knowledgeable on this stuff. It is so frustrating watching people who are out of touch with reality sit in a corporate focus group or meeting room at a conference and make decisions for the writers and the creators. You hired these people, let them do their jobs and do what they're good at. I'd rather have a story that wasn't as good because it was the fault of the writer, because at least the writer was passionate and tried their best, as opposed to, I can tell that this is just corporate, they threw this in here, they wanted this in there, whatever. It happens time and time again. All of that to say, I think that's why Andor is really this shining gem right now for a lot of Star Wars fans who are frustrated with the stuff going on the corporate end of things. is because Andor just got to be its own story. There wasn't all this meddling going on, you know, or if there was, it definitely was not anywhere near as obvious as it was with all of our main, you know, Mandoverse stuff. And I think it's very frustrating as a Star Wars fan to sit and just watch all of this go on. It's so pointless and unnecessary. I'm really hopeful that with the Ahsoka season 1, you know, really for me being a huge hit, and you know, as someone who grew up with the character of Ahsoka, I felt like it was done very well. I'm excited for season 2 coming out allegedly 2026, and with the Mando and Grogu movie coming out, I think we're hopefully back on track. You know, I really want to hope that we're back on track with where things should be. If not, then I guess we're out of luck, you know. I love the story though. I love The Mandalorian. I'm never going to stop loving The Mandalorian. I love the characters, and I love the family story that it's trying to tell. I can really enjoy Mandalorian with whoever, and I think that it's not the same with Andor. That's kind of the point I'm trying to make here. Is I think that we have a small niche of the Star Wars fandom that's very vocal about their love for Andor, and in saying how much they love Andor, I think that they're losing sight of, and we are losing sight of, what Star Wars is at its core. What Star Wars is supposed to be, what it was intended to be. Again, I have no problem at all with Andor. I have no problem with the existing. I have no problem if they make more projects like Andor. But I think that the main focus of Star Wars should always remain that family story, that it remains very core and important to all of us. I feel like that's all I have to say on this topic. I think this was one of those that was like a little too long for me to talk about on like just a shorter video. So I kind of want to discuss it on a Blitzcast episode. It's also one of those that just we're just in that drought right now. You know, I'm coming up with topics to talk about week to week. Not every podcast episode is going to be, you know, hour and a half long. As far as content coming out in the future here, I've got some cool stuff coming up. I've got tons of reviews I need to do coming up in the next few days. I do have a couple days off work, so hopefully I'll have time without too many technical difficulties to really sit down and record some stuff, get some stuff out early for patrons and channel members, and get a nice catalog of content out. I've got a really cool video that I'm planning on doing really soon too for collecting. I'm going to title it something along the lines of like, are collectors too broke, or is collecting getting too expensive? And it's a very multifaceted issue I really want to talk about here on the channel. So that's really all I've got for you this week. I know it's a shorter episode, but sometimes it just is what it is. I'd rather make, you know, what I think is decent conversation rather than just try and draw stuff out. I'm also back hitting the gym for the first time in a long time. I've been hitting the gym this week. I'm very sore, and that's going to be the next thing I do after this. So wish me luck on those gains. I'm, you know, trying to clean up my diet and stuff too. So wish me luck. But as always, guys, make sure to check out the links in the description below, as I said before. Again, if you want to see this podcast early, if you want to see future podcasts early, make sure to join that Patreon. But yeah, that's pretty much all I got, guys. Let me know what you think in the description below. Let me know what you think in the comments below about this topic. Do you think that I'm wrong? Do you think I'm right? Let's talk about it in the comments. But with that, guys, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I'll catch you for the next one, and may the Force be with you.
Breaking off. All units, fire at will. 1, 2, pick your targets. Too many, Captain. Watch your stabilizer, Gold 6. Anybody cover me. I've got 2 vultures on my tail. I've got to hold them here. Watch your left. I can't shake them. I'm hit. Where's the reinforcement?